and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you here. I'm Xavier Pasco. I'm a new director of Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, FRS, in Paris, and one of the members of this European Union Non-Proliferation Consortium group of think tanks. And it's my pleasure to chair this roundtable today about missile defense development in various areas of the world. Thinking about these topics, I thought it was interesting that, to see that the concept of missile defense, which has been very much linked to the nuclear era and was born from the nuclear weapons development some 60 or 50 years ago, has gone through different highs and lows. With a well-known high in the 80s with the discovery for many of us of the possibilities of creating some huge strategic defense system with the so-called Star Wars or Strategic Defense Initiative under the Reagan era. And then after that, of course, we all know what became this program and how it has evolved through different systems and R&D projects afterwards. It's been followed by a number of technological advances on a more reduced scale, and especially in the years 2000. And we see today, if I understand what we hear from the different parts of the world, we will approach today the resurgence of the perspective of operational systems at regional scale. And in this respect, and that was my personal reflection on this, it's more and more clear that the link between the level of the maturity of technology and associated, by the way, with other technology evolution, as Andrew Fetter has clearly, I think, indicated in the previous session. We're talking about cyber, we're talking about other kind of technologies. The convergence of these technologies have made these missile defense systems, I would say, more on the front scene again. And it's interesting to see that the technology and the programs are really driven by this convergence between the technology itself and some, I would say, favorable situations, geopolitical situations for them to develop. And I think this connection between the technology and the geopolitical conditions is a real key driver in the missile defense technology evolutions. To talk about this evolution and possibly about this key connection, I would say, we have with us today three undisputed experts. I will start with Ambassador Masafumi Ishii, who has a long career in the Japan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with a special and continued focus on international security issues. He will be our first speaker, and we have a second speaker, Jakub Cimoracki, working for NATO, and prior to that you were working for the Ministry of Defense in the Czech Republic, and also with a strong focus on all these issues. And our last speaker will be Mr. Uzi Rubin, a well-known leading expert in the field of missile defense, with also a long career associated with the development of such systems in Israel. So without taking too much of the time, we will have some 10, 15 possibly minutes presentations. It will be followed by a question-answer session. So please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Javier. Good morning, everybody. Just simply forget about my titles shown on the screen. More importantly, I'm a Japanese government representative to NATO. So that's why I'm here. Although I'm no expert of missile defense. So I'm supposed to talk about Asia. I'll focus on Northeast Asia, where everything is fine, no problem. So we don't need anything. Quite contrary. I want to throw out a few points for discussion. First, we do have capabilities and we do have technologies in Japan. First, Japan has capabilities. Missile defense is with two layers. First layer is what I think you know more or less the technology, right? So first layer is a mid-course phase. I mean, just boost phase, mid-course phase, terminal phase, as you know. So mid-course phase, we do have Aegis ships capable of shooting SM-3 standard missiles, 3 Block 1A, and we have 4 of them. 2 under renovation. We are constructing 2 new ones. So altogether, it's going to be 8. And I think 3 is enough for covering all Japanese archipelago. So we are capable of covering all Japan with the Aegis. But just for the sake of backup, we have the second layer. That is a terminal phase. And we have, for that, we have a Patriot 3, PAC-3. And we have 6 missile groups. Each launcher covers like around a few tens of kilometers. So, which means it has to be focused on certain areas. So this is our capabilities. And in addition to that, the United States has its own asset deployed in the theater around Japan. And we are connected between Japan and the United States. We are connected in terms of information we get from radars, in terms of the reaction, we are connected. And in terms of technology, we are doing a joint development of a new standard missile 3 system, Block 2A, we call it. And there are some other sort of cooperation going on. And last but not least, you know the recent news, Republic of Korea and the United States decided to deploy 3rd missile system, which is also like a Patriot. It's a terminal phase, but it's a higher range. So, and I think they are going to do it within 1 year. I've just heard interviews of the commander of the Korean force saying that within 10 months or something. So it's going to happen by the end of next year anyway. So that's capability technologies, pretty good, right? Second, what's for? Well, I think that is to deter and defend against the DPRK missiles, ballistic missiles. And they do have few hundred, what they call Nodon missile, with a range of like 1,500, which covers more or less whole Japan. And they have few hundred of them, maybe 300. But they do, number of launchers is a little bit less than few hundred. It's going to be, it's like 50, around 50. But the problem is it takes only 6 to 15 minutes for these missiles to reach to the 4 corners of Japan. So you don't have much reaction time. So, and we don't know yet what will be on the warhead either. Now, how about, well, I've just talked about the deep North Korea missile going to Japan, but how about the North Korea missile going to the United States? Can we do anything about it in Japan? To put it simply, we don't have capabilities now, not yet. But when and if we have capabilities, legally and theoretically, we can shoot it down. If the situation that is a bare survival of Japan, and the US is obviously the treaty ally for us, if we just say hi, goodbye to the missile going to the United States, even if we have capabilities, that pretty much sounds like touching our survival. So that's what for. Number 3, a little bit of footnote. As you know, missile defense is by nature defensive. And in addition to that, nothing is perfect. Missile defense is not perfect. We need to know that. You cannot be 100% assured of the capability of missile defense. So that means, I think, preventing conflict through dialogue and the pressure is by far the priority for us. So it will continue to be so, even though we are determined to strengthen our capabilities. That's a very important footnote for us. Number 4, now I'm entering into the cooperation side. You know, my sense is, you know, Europe is closer to Asia than you think. And actually, Europe is closer to Asia than the United States is to Asia. I'll show you the figures, right? If you measure the distance from the missile launching camp in North Korea, which is called Tonchanri, which is in the north, very close to the Chinese border. What is the closest capital from there? Obviously Seoul, right? 300 kilometers. What is the next closest capital from that area? Beijing, 700. And then next, Japan comes, Tokyo, 1,400, double, I mean, sort of twice as far as Beijing. So I'm sure Beijing, somewhere in the brain, has a bit of concern over the increase of capability of North Korea. Now, more importantly, then after that, Moscow comes, 6,300. Then after that, who comes in? Brussels, Paris, London, which ranges between 9,000, 9,500. Where's the United States? Only after that, LA comes in. LA, San Francisco, let me step back and then talk about the distance of Brussels, Paris, and London. That is not 9,000, that is 8,400 to 8,700. Then comes LA and San Francisco, which are 9,000, 9,500. Then the end of Europe comes, that's Lisbon. That is a little bit more than 10,000, 10,100. Then only after that, the Washington, D.C. and New York comes, which is 11,000. So I'm not saying DPRK is going to bombard Europe. It doesn't make much sense. But reality is, capability-wise, whenever you hear Kim Jong-un say that we are about to develop missile that can reach continental USA, I think if that becomes truth, you are covered. You are within range in Europe. So, I mean, when you create your security policy, you don't normally base that only on intention gap that can be changed, but also on capabilities. So at least capability-wise, you are more vulnerable to the North Korean missiles than the United States. That's my point. Last point is that means, I think, there's room as well as rationale for the cooperation over missile defense between Europe and Japan and Asia and the United States. Well, in terms of technology, concepts, and as Japanese government representative of NATO, well, I wouldn't be surprised if we try to cooperate with NATO on this issue. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very illuminating landscape in the region. I think we will go back to the different aspects you mentioned during the question-answer session. I will now give the floor to Jakub Simorski. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Xavier, and very good morning to all of you. It's indeed a great privilege to be here in this panel, and I also thank the organizers for having NATO invited in this debate, because I indeed do believe that NATO, and especially from the European perspective, has indeed something to say here. With no surprise, I will focus a little bit on the recent summit in Warsaw and what it brings in terms of ballistic missile defense. I will also try to elaborate a little bit on how we got to that point. And indeed, with no surprise, I will also try to elaborate a little bit on where we go from now and what could future be for NATO ballistic missile defense. To start from the very beginning, you have heard from numerous speakers throughout this conference that the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery is growing. In NATO, allies do share this assessment, and you could see even explicitly in the Warsaw Communique the agreement or the assessment of all 28 allies recognizing again the threat posed by proliferation of ballistic missiles is increasing. That's the bottom line for us, and of course main driver of our efforts. NATO as such is indeed a political military organization. So on one hand, we do support all the diplomatic and political effort in a non-proliferation domain. On the other hand, we have our responsibility for collective defense of our members, of all 28 allies, and that's why we try to develop together both political and military tools to tackle the problem. I should stress and underline it would be really short-sighted to depend on one or the other. All these efforts must go together. There is no, and I'm happy that Ambassador Ishi mentioned that there is no bulletproof solution, no 100% solution, no 100% assurance. So we need to basically really provide a combination of effort in various domains, including the military domain, to make sure that the threat posed to us is mitigated or neutralized ideally. So I will speak, of course, on what we do in military terms, but please let us recognize that it is just part of broader picture of NATO activities facing the threat by ballistic missiles. In 2010, you may know, we actually decided to develop missile defense. 2 years later, in Chicago, we declared the first what we called significant or operationally significant step, which was the interim capability. From that point, we then proceeded to Warsaw. In Warsaw, the main achievement in missile defense domain was declaration of initial operational capability. It is certainly strengthening the protection of NATO, but still, of course, short of providing the very aim objective, which is full protection of NATO. So as you know, this is providing sort of limited protection to the southern part of NATO against, I would stress, less sophisticated threats and more limited threats. The capability that was declared in Warsaw 4 months ago, was especially enabled by the US deployment of the Aegis Ashore in Romania, together also with some previously available assets, namely the 4 Aegis ships available or home ported in Rota port in Spain, as well as, of course, the US forward-based radar in Turkey, and very importantly also some lower layer contributions from other allies, from European allies. When I spoke about what Warsaw brought in terms of developments, I should also mention what has not changed actually in Warsaw. What hasn't changed in Warsaw in terms of NATO ballistic missile defense are the key policy principles that are governing the development of this capability and how we see it. I already mentioned, despite the fact that NATO basically recognizes 3 pillars of its activities: collective defense, cooperative security, crisis management, BMD as such is clearly a tool for collective defense, for the core task of collective defense. It contributes to deterrence, to the overall deterrence and defense posture of alliance, together with conventional forces and nuclear forces, but it is just one piece or one component of this. In plenary session this morning, you could hear some arguments about whether ballistic missile development can contribute to reduce reliance on nuclear. That was indeed debated in NATO as well, but now, or we collectively didn't share and do not share this assessment. That's why we stress and underline basically in every summit since the decision in 2010 that BND in NATO context is only a complement to nuclear deterrence, certainly not a substitute to it, and that still holds. BND is also described and being designed as adaptive. Adaptive means that we really need to look at the threat and make sure that we do not only dedicate the system to one particular threat, but still assure that if threat develops, and threat do develop over time, we are able to react flexibly to those developments and evolutions. I already mentioned that there is sort of a territorial geographic limitation to NATO BMD. It is, as a matter of policy, only limited to NATO Europe. As you know, for North America, there are different arrangements. So NATO BMD is for NATO Europe. And the ultimate goal is indeed full protection, full coverage and protection of NATO European territories, populations, and forces. Threat assessment also brings me to the question of solidarity. Probably it would go with no surprise to you that particle threat perception in various corners of our alliance can differ. Different perception in Turkey, different in Poland, different in Portugal. What matters the most is that we always agree on some common threat assessment, which is driving our defense planning and developments. It's a principle of solidarity and indivisible security in Europe. Another important element that I would like to mention is political control. BMD, with no doubt, due to its reach, transboundary effects, and strategic impact, is very important politically, not only militarily. That's why it is of utmost importance that we have really good balance between the operational effectiveness and the political control on the other hand, so that basically all 20 allies can feel comfortably in terms of what is being done in terms of ballistic missile defense operations. The key decisions in the BMD context are basically done at the political level, and because of the very obvious time constraints, those decisions need to be done in advance. Typically, it is the political level who determines or decides on the defense design, where we deploy our assets, what areas we protect, what are the main rules of engagement, rules of use of force, what are the main command control arrangements at various levels of command. So all those issues are pre-agreed at the political level. Of course, they are designed and developed by the non-military, but the final agreement is the top political level. And I would argue that this is the main vehicle for assuring political control by all 28 allies. There is also another important element, which is, of course, related to Russia. And I'm happy to see some Russian friends in the audience in here. We stress and underline every single time when we basically make some statement on BMD. This capability is neither designed nor capable against Russia. We do believe that it is not capable to upset the Russian deterrent. However, we also recognize that this is not necessarily the view that will be shared by Russia itself, which is unfortunate, but it is the situation where we are. So, but despite, and I would stress, despite the very difficult development in the European security theater over the last several years, this policy statement that was basically already developed in Lisbon and Chicago has remained unchanged. We even went a step further in saying in the Warsaw Communique that we don't even intend to redesign the capability in the future. So I believe we have provided very good and solid political assurance. But it's, of course, political assurance. Lastly, I would like to recall that our capability is basically based on commonly funded BMC3R, or if you wish, command control backbone, into which we plug in assets, systems provided by individual allies on a voluntary basis. So while basically the backbone is common funded, the other system, sensors, shooters, are provided on a voluntary basis. So we will dependent on the willingness of allies to contribute to this, and this is also a very important principle that hasn't been changed over the last several years. So this is what was Warsaw. Now, I would also like to remind that IOC, the initial operational capability that we declared, is really not a last step. Last step is the full operational capability, full coverage and protection of NATO Europe. And frankly speaking, it will take years. It's not something that we can reach in 1 or 2 years. So in the way forward, in the way ahead, we'll probably focus on several domains. Always BMD is basically a combination of political effort, technical or technological effort, BMD program, and of course operational or military effort. In terms of political oversight, it will still remain of utmost importance that our leaders, the North Atlantic Council or the allies, have good awareness of what's going on, where we develop. We do have regular briefings for the ambassadors. We have regular activities, events with them. So there is, and of course we regularly review all the key documents I mentioned. So some policy and planning documents which are approved at the council level. All those documents are regularly reviewed to assure that there is really good political control of all allies. We also try not to underestimate the training and education. Sometimes it is a little bit underestimated because people believe, or people like to talk about systems, very capable systems, very good policy documents and plans and concepts, but after all, it's about humans in the loop. And if we don't have people who are able to make decisions, who understand the environment, then the capability will be much less efficient. So that's why we should always put a lot of effort to make sure that all the decision makers from the top political level down to the ground level really understand the system, understand the context and the respective roles and responsibilities. We also, as I mentioned, have a very particular technical program related to ballistic missile defense, which is designed to deliver some technical functionalities for both for planning and for executing of BMD operations. This program has only delivered some initial results, which also contributed to the declaration of IOC in Warsaw, but there is still some way to go to provide all the necessary functionalities for the BMD commanders. And finally, what we will also see in the future, I hope and I believe that many European allies, as well as US of course, will develop their own capabilities and potential contributions. So when I speak of contributions, I should not limit myself only to sensors and shooters, but also you know that there were some important contributions in terms of hosting arrangement by Spain, Turkey, Romania, Poland, eventually Germany. There are also important contributions in terms of sensor capacities. There may be also important contributions in terms of some force protection assets. You may know that Aegis ship, for example, is a good example, is something relatively vulnerable, especially if it is dedicated to particular mission on BMD. So it really does require some other assets to protect that. So force protection is something we are also looking at, and even nations who do not themselves possess BMD capable assets can provide something very helpful for the overall BMD architecture by providing force protection assets. I could follow perhaps then in Q&A session with other potential contributions and opportunities for allies, but perhaps let me finish at this point in time, and I'm looking forward to debate further eventually.
Thank you very much, Jakub. Thank you very much for a nice overview of what's going on in NATO. I will now turn to Mr. Rubin for our last presentation.
Thank you. And it's a privilege to be addressing this excellent conference. Let me say that Israel missile defense is a response to a strongly asymmetric threat, which is not only on Israel, it's a part of a pattern in the Middle East and perhaps a harbinger of the future. It's not only Israel which is facing a severe missile threat. I'm not sure whether you are aware that there is a very intensive missile warfare going on in Syria during the Syrian-Syria war, civil war. Both Russian missiles, but mainly the Assad forces has used most of its large stockpile of missiles and rockets against the opposition during the years of the civil war. And as we speak now, missiles again are a game changer in the civil war in Yemen. Last month, the Houthi insurgents, or the Houthi side, supported by Iran, enhanced and escalated the stakes in that war by opening a strategic campaign against Saudi main cities. Both Taif, which is the summer capital of Saudi Arabia, and Jeddah were attacked by long-range ballistic missiles. The Jeddah attack was thwarted by missile defense, and you could only imagine what would be the results if a missile would have hit downtown Jeddah or the harbor of Jeddah. It's the last harbor of the escalation of the war would be indescribable. So Israel is facing the same kind of asymmetric threat. It's only one part of the asymmetric threat. Another part of the asymmetric threat is using population centers as a basis for launching missiles. That's human shielding of the missile bases. And the other part is the subterranean warfare, tunnel warfare. The missiles now, the missile threat, rocket and missile threat is now the main military threat on Israel. So our missile defense is a response to this threat. I think that perhaps a harbinger of the future is Hezbollah is taking it as an example. It's a non-state organization, although now after the election of the new Lebanese president, perhaps you would say a semi-official state force, but up to now a non-state military force, about 4 divisions, size of about 4 divisions, very well trained, equipped. It has the firepower to cause great damage in Israel, both to the population and to military and civilian infrastructure with precision rockets, the growing numbers of precision rockets. So it has a capability of a strike force without having one aircraft. Think about that. This is face of war as we are seeing it in the future. So again, this threat, Israel has developed and is deploying a very complex missile defense shield, fully integrated. It will eventually have 4 layers, 2 ballistic phase layers and 2 terminal phase layers. We are not dealing with boost phase. Technology is beyond the capability, I think, of anyone up to now, although the United States is starting again a boost phase program, strategic boost phase program, experimental, I mean, only a technology program, but based on lasers, on high power lasers. This is beyond us. We are talking about technologies based on interceptor missiles. So we are deploying it, and we have 2 of those layers in place already. And unfortunately, since we see wars all the time, our short-range missile defense system has already seen action many times, but in 2 occasions quite noticeable, in 2 rounds of fighting around Gaza, in 2012 and 2014, where our Iron Dome took center stage in the operations. And I think one can learn already some lessons beyond the technical side of it, about how it influences the correlation of forces and the dynamics of the conflicts. And you see there are bad news and good news. Start with the bad news is that according to some analysts, some predicted that because if missile defense is successful, it would reduce the attraction of missile for the other side. I mean, perhaps it will stop the proliferation, because missiles, maybe they'll go to something else and do something else, but not missiles. This has been proven wrong. The existence of effective defenses is energizing them to find ways to try to overcome these defenses, which energizes us to find ways to overcome their ways, and so on and so forth. This is a race, a technological race, in which we feel comfortable that we'll have the edge, since we have a very sophisticated high technology capability. The good side of it is that, as predicted, the existence of missile defense, of effective defense, has mitigated the escalation and encouraged and enhanced crisis stability. In the 2 rounds in 2012 and 2014, because we had missile defense, which prevented damage and reduced it, enabled the country to continue functioning with, I won't say the word damage or losses, there were damage and losses, but much minimized compared to 2006, when the Second Lebanon War, when we were completely unprotected. When we were unprotected, we had to escalate. We had no other choice but to escalate. There was no other position. These 2 cases, 2012, 2014, our government could take its time. In 2012, we didn't even use ground forces. The conflict was, or the round of violence was ended by diplomacy. And in 2014, we could take it for about 50 days until the other side decided to stop the fighting. Again, we used ground forces in 2014, but not against the rockets and the missiles. We used it against the tunnels, the other side of the asymmetric threat. We had to go in because we had no other choice to take out the tunnels, but not the rockets. The rockets, we could cope with that with defense only. So I think this was a great experiment in stabilization. One could think about the alternative of being unprotected under such an attack. We were attacked by 4,500 rockets and mortar bombs. Without missile defense, I did some calculation, would suffer perhaps thousands of casualties and undescribable amount of damage. Since this was prevented, the government could take its time and use combination of diplomacy and military moves in order to bring the conflict to an end of that round. And since then, we have the quietest period ever around the Gaza Strip. I don't vouch for tomorrow, but up to now, life returned to normal, where it was normal, it was not normal before that. So we consider the missile defense as not only a technical success, but also, if you will, a strategic success in the sense of strategy on a small scale. What Israel missile defense is not, it's not part of some kind of an attempt like Star Wars to upset some kind of a deterrence equation. Our deterrence equation is completely different. Our missile defense is simply air defense in the modern age. If you want to protect your skies today, you have to protect them not against manned aircraft, because the bomber fleets have gone. You have to protect them against missiles and rockets fired from a distance. Our problem is technical challenge is to protect against such threats coming from ranges of few kilometers to few hundred kilometers to few thousand kilometers. So we need a very complex system. There is no one way or one device or one system that can do the whole spectrum of defense. So we need those various systems to defend against them. Our Chief of Staff, in his very memorable speech in January 2016 about the strategy of the Israel Defense Forces, mentioned even a fifth layer, although he didn't detail about that. And if I have my guess what it is, we are talking about a very low, short, even shorter range defense against mortar bombs and the new threat of, I'm not sure if you heard about it, but it's used quite extensively in Syria. It's what's called the barrel bombs. They take a big barrel with explosives, put a rocket at the end of it. It goes to a kilometer or two, but the destructive force is unbelievable. You see some YouTube clips from Syria. If things like that happen in Lebanon border and Gaza border, we need some defense against it because of destructive powers. And so maybe, this is the fifth layer that we're talking about. So we are forging ahead. We have a very large organization in Israel that I had the honor of starting, which is now even bigger than in my time, running one of the largest defense programs in Israel. There was a controversy in Israel when we started it, because some of our analysts saw it as some kind of a Star Wars, an Israeli Star Wars, and were naturally aligned against it. But I think today there is a complete consensus that this is an essential and necessary element in Israeli military power, no less than our Air Force or our Armored Force. I think that point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rubin, for this very interesting view of the lessons learned. Unfortunately, by Israel, I had to learn lessons about using that, and it illustrates, I think, very well the intuition I had about this connection between the technology and geopolitical situation. In fact, we talked about different systems and different missile defenses. I mean, in terms of what it's like and what it's intended to do. So what I will do right now is to give the floor to the audience. So we will take a number of questions in a row. I see a mini. So we will start with you. I think there's it's working, this one. Yeah, maybe it's. Okay. Please, Mr. Ogo.
Thank you. I'm very much impressed by the presentations of the panel members. And I have questions.
Oh, please, could you name, excuse me, yes.
I'm Sergei Rogov from the Russian Academy of Sciences. And I have questions to each of the participants. First, Ambassador Ishii, you spoke about cooperation on ballistic missile defense between Asia, meaning Japan, and Europe. You didn't mention cooperation between Japan and Russia. Vladivostok is much closer to the missile launch position of North Korea than Tokyo. And Russia does have some S-300 and I believe now S-400 missile defenses in the area which we call the Far East. So I would appreciate if you can enlighten me on this issue. I have two questions to Mr. Chemaratsky. The first question is related to the discussions which we had between Russia and NATO for several years until the present crisis, the discussions on ballistic missile defense cooperation. There were different ideas how to do it. Well, American ideas, Russian ideas, we failed to compromise, but now when the mill-to-mill cooperation has been ended by NATO, does it mean, and the Russian-NATO relationship deteriorated in general, does it mean that the idea of Russian-NATO cooperation ballistic missile defense is dead and buried? That's the first question. The second question is connected to your statement that ballistic missile defense, if I quote you correctly, is now integrated into the nuclear posture of NATO, not as a substitute, but as an integral part of it. And that leads me to the question why there is concern in Russia about what NATO and the United States is doing. And in my personal opinion, Aegis Ashore in Romania with SM-3 Block 1B interceptor is not a threat to Russia. But in 2018, when there will be deployment in Poland, and SM-3 Block 2A may appear, that could be a different story, since there is a debate whether SM-3 Block 2A can intercept Russian ICBMs or not. But the main problem is that for Russia, that what the United States and NATO are doing in ballistic missile defenses is an open-ended program. And that forces us to think in terms of the worst-case scenario. Yes, today it's not a problem, but what about tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, etc. In particular, since the nuclear deal with Iran removed for the next 10 or 15 years the prospects of an Iranian long-range nuclear-tipped missile. And apparently nobody ever built an ICBM with a conventional warhead. Only 3 countries built ICBMs, and all of them have nuclear warheads. A conventional ICBM seems to be a rather ridiculous and expensive and useless toy. And if the Iranian potential threat right now does not exist, then why the so-called adaptive approach was not adapted to this major change? Because, of course, well, Russia has missiles which can attack targets in Europe. And while there is no, in this sense, while there is no Iranian threat, there is a potential Russian threat, and in foreseeable future will stay. That's what leads us to the suspicion that the NATO and American ballistic missile defenses will be upgraded more and more to deal with our nuclear deterrence. And I would appreciate your comment. And my question to Mr. Rubin is related to the boost phase defense. You said that there is not much interest in boost phase defense anymore. but there are some experiments which the United States resumed. And my question is, what about long-range drones? Use of long-range drones with lasers or other attack capabilities for the boost phase defense. Is it possible, and what is your view on that subject? Thank you.
Just given the large scope of your question, maybe we're gonna just answer the questions right now, and then we will pass to the other, so we can. So, Ambassador Ishii, if you want to start.
Okay. Japan-Russia cooperation on missile defense sounds very interesting. Rather than closing the door completely, I think if we have some proposal, we are happy to discuss about it, I think. And we do have, believe it or not, 2+2 meeting between Japan and Russia, defense and the foreign ministers meeting. So it's up to you.
Well, since Putin is coming to Japan, that could be one of the topics for discussion.
Sounds interesting, I think.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please, Jakub.
Yeah, I wish I can reply so briefly, but there are a few questions. Is cooperation dead and burned? Someone yesterday, used a nice expression. It's not dead but not alive. So, short term. Yeah, excuse me. Short term. It's indeed probably not realistic to see resumption of this cooperation. Longer term, I would not exclude it. We are always surprised in history by very, I would say, surprise developments, so I would not exclude it. It would certainly make sense for many reasons, and some level of cooperation would be helpful, but as we both know, the conditions are not right now favorable to it, but I would only agree that it is dead short term. We shouldn't exclude what will happen next. BMD in the context of
it could come back as a zombie?
perhaps, if you like zombies.
But then,
part of nuclear posture, I would never call it part of nuclear posture. I mentioned deliberately there are three elements to overall deterrence and defense posture: nuclear forces, conventional forces, and missile defense. That's how we see it, so that those are three different components. We may always discuss on how much one or the other is important for the posture, but those are three distinct components, and we try to keep balance between them and keep those three layers. Open-ended, yes, I understand this is the key concern on Russian side, and it's difficult to tackle in case that there is a lack of trust. I understand it. So despite all the political assurances, probably you don't trust them too much. You believe, okay, you can always put something else in the canister, you can choose something else, then basically you say it is there. So after all, I would perhaps come back to your own statement from yesterday that there is some verification would be needed. That was, as you know, part of the offer from NATO in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, some sort of transparency regime. Eventually, discussion didn't materialize on this particular topic, but I would see a merit, of course, or I would see this could be, of course, a solution to it, because it's about now how to make sure that, Aegis Ashore, for instance, Romania, that Tomahawk instead of SM-3s are not put in. You cannot do it probably any other way than just establish some sort of verification regime. But this is, as we all know, part of basically broader discussion, and there would be always a package solution, and not probably something, one particular memorandum or basically protocol on this one. Next, Iranian threat. Indeed, another traditional matter of different perception between NATO and Russia. We have always seen Iran much, probably, not much, but a different way than Russia. I don't want to speculate on particular. I cannot, unfortunately, in this sort of open session and classified session, elaborate too much on how we see particular threats. That as a matter of policy, we don't even name particular threats. So that would be driving our defense. So I just would limit myself to state, well, I would not fully share the assessment of Iran that you mentioned, especially when it comes to the deal with Iran agreed a year ago, which, as we again all know, is not including ballistic missile capabilities. And that's what matters the most for us. You know, as long as they are developing the capability, we just need to be concerned. That's as simple as that. We may always debate, you know, how likely it is that they would use it, but the capability development continues, and the deal has not prevented that. I believe that's all the questions.
Mr. Robey.
You asked one question that I want to answer also to relate the question of capabilities of missile with no nuclear warheads. I think there is a revolution here.
In Israel is a different story.
No, I'm going on the universal side of it, because there's another thing this morning session about the impact of revolution on armament and arms control. And I think there is a revolution going on here which people don't appreciate the meaning of, which I'd like to talk about. I just talked about it in London a few days ago. But let me first answer directly to your question about boost phase intercept. Boost phase intercept is something that was 30 years now on the headlines. Why? Because it's very attractive. It sounds simple. Why? The missile looks very, very noticeable, very high signature, and also it's before it deploys its countermeasures. So everybody's brother is after it. But this is the most difficult technology, not the most easy, most difficult. It's misleading. This first thing, the time window is too short. Boosting it, even for ICBMs, compared to the boost phase, to the ballistic phase, which may take 20 minutes, the boost phase takes about, maybe at most, 3 minutes. So you have a short time. During that short time, because of the shortage of the time, if you want to launch something at the boost, at the missile, at the accelerating missile, you have to be close enough. I mean, these ideas of 10 Mach missiles, I know that analysts are proposing them. I don't know how to make them. That's beyond the technological capability, even in the United States or Russia or China. So you have to be close by. You have to be close by. You go into the defense zone of the attacker. So what did you do? Your asset can be shot down by anti-aircraft missiles. Then there is this one problem. Of course, one way to overcome it comes to mind is to use a light-speed weapon, laser weapons. Again, you are hitting technological limit on two accounts. First, you need a lot of power. The entrance game is 100 kilowatt, at least 100 kilowatt if you want to start thinking about something. But you need much more than that in order to hit an ICBM. And this is very heavy. The last attempt the Americans made was an ABL. They needed a whole 747 to carry the generating equipment. Now Admiral Searing is talking about electrical lasers on UAVs. Well, even an electrical laser with let's say efficiency of 20 or 30%, it's still very, very heavy, especially its cooling system. How they put it on a UAV, I don't know which kind of a UAV. I think there is several problems there. The other problem is, of course, that even a laser beam disperses after a while. So the range is not infinite. And again, you're going to disrupt it. You have to go within range. ABL at the range of, they say, 400 kilometers. So still within Iranian defense zone. So the whole thing, when you think about this, is one of those simple things. It sounds simple, but you come to almost an engineer, it's almost impossible. I hear that energy weapons are, in 5 years' time, there'll be anti-missile lasers. But I hear this 5 years, every year it's another 5 years. So it's not there yet. So this is my opinion as an engineer to your question. But I want to relate to something else about Iranian or anyone's threat of missiles, long-range missiles without nuclear. Whether is a missile without a nuclear warhead a threat at a distance? I'm not about the tactical threat of Israel. And the answer is yes, it's going to be like that, because the spread of super accurate ballistic missiles now everywhere. You can see them from India to Iran. Iran last year displayed Shahab with a steerable, guidable re-entry vehicle. That can be, like the Pershing 2 in its time, accurate at the distance of pinpoint accuracy, the distance of 2,000 kilometers. Now, if you extend this capability and think about the implication of this capability, it's not nuclear, but you can hit precision target, let's say a power station, which is, you can cause a great harm. Now, to think about hitting a nuclear power station. just the threat of a country which threatens to hit your nuclear power station without using nuclear warhead. I think that's something that defenders have to think about. Missiles are becoming acquiring the capability of near unacceptable damage without nuclear. This is, I think, a revolution in strategy that is still not being internalized by many strategists and have to be taken into account.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. I return from your intervention that lasers for missile defense, it's a bit like going to Mars. You know, it's 50 years that people say that we'll be on Mars in 30 years. So it seems to be a bit like that. First, Ambassador Streza, and then yourself, and then yourself, and then after that. Please, Ambassador, first. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
then we come
Well,
to that.
since Federica Mogherini yesterday invited us to make propose innovative solutions, and since this panel is also dedicated to Asia, I would like to propose to this panel a discussion on what I proposed to the DPRK panel yesterday, and that is that we should inspire ourselves to the INF negotiations of the end of the Cold War, where NATO deployed new missiles in Europe as a bargaining chip to reach an agreement on the elimination of these missiles in the INF Treaty. So the United States and South Korea intend to deploy missile defense system, terminal high altitude area defense, and this could be the element of the bargain. That is that South Korea and US renounce to or retreat renounce this deployment in exchange of an elimination of the North Korean nuclear program. I would like to consider, to members of the panel, in particular Ambassador Ishii, to consider this proposal. I know that it takes time to think about it, but in any case, a kind of immediate reaction. Thank you.
Thank you. We take another question. Just, Mr.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you for identifying yourself.
My name is Alexander Borontsov. I'm also from Russian Academy of Sciences. And I would like to continue first your question dealing with THAAD system in South Korea, how much it can improve capability to defend South Korea, Japan, and how much it can change the regional balance in the, it's very broadly discussed and disputed question now. And second question, short question. Recently, for the first time, the United States, Japan, and South Korea conducted trilateral drills dealing with anti-missile defense. What's the
USN?
trilateral maneuver, trilateral training, military training, Japan, US, South Korea, dealing with anti-missile defense. What's the result of this drill? What's the purpose, result? Thank you.
Thank you. Then, Mr. Here, and at the
Sorry, I'm also Russian, but that doesn't mean I'm going to steal the show. And as long as I am from the Russian mission to NATO, which is a strange combination of words nowadays, I'm not going to go deeply into official Russian position, and will limit myself to only two questions. First of all, I would like to focus on two things that was said by a distinguished NATO representative. First, it was about the thesis that the NATO missile defense is not directed at Russia, and the second part was that it is indeed a combination of contributions, of national contributions, which are brought into integrated air and missile defense. And the question is, as long as there are some inputs potential right now, but they are already unofficially declared, for example, the project in Poland, the Shield of Poland, which is going into the direction right now. I understand that the contracts are not signed yet, but still it is going into the direction of buying some Patriot batteries from US. And as long as we hear actually from the officials, Polish officials, that the main purpose of their future capabilities, actually to counter some Russian missile potential. So is there any thinking in the alliance right now, or maybe you're just starting to think about it, about the political approach into this controversial situation when the whole system is officially not directed at Russia, but some elements of it are officially by some nations planned at least to be directed at Russia? So this is the first question. And the second question goes to distinguished ambassador. I just wanted to, just for my better knowledge and understanding of the issue of missile defense, we all know and hear that China is going right now more and more vocal with its concerns regarding missile defense developments in the region. And do you have some bilateral structured dialogue with China, maybe not focused just on missile defense, maybe strategic political military dialogue, but which includes missile defense consultations? And if yes, then how it's going, just for us to better understand. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last question for the moment over there, the person.
Han Hua from Peking University, China. I'm very glad to hear Ambassador Yiqi when you talk about what does the SAT system deployment is for. You didn't mention China. I'm glad to hear that. But I still want you to elaborate a little bit about SAT system, the implication in this region, especially when they talk about the three-way military system, alignment system among the three countries in this region. There's any, intelligence sharing agreement or in terms of operation of SAT between South Korea and Japan, and if the sharing agreement among the three countries does imply the U.S. can really share the information about the operation between South Korea and the U.S.
Thank you. So we stop there, and we will have the answers. I think, Ambassador Ishii, you have a number of answers related to questions, at least related to the bargain element aspect, possible aspect for the DPRK, and also the drill and the Japan, the trilateral exercise. Please.
First, quick reaction to Ambassador's suggestion about using deployment of THAAD as a bargaining chip for realizing denuclearization. I wish that is enough to do it. I think if that is a deal we can do, sounds great. But I don't think, I'm afraid, that that's enough. That based upon our past experience. Now the impact of THAAD on the regional strategic perspective or strategic balance. Important thing to realize is that you don't have to hear that from me, but I think what the United States and South Korea made quite clear when they announced the decision for deploying THAAD was that they would use it solely against the North Korean missiles, nothing else, no other third countries. Of course, it's a policy statement, but I think that is a clear policy of two countries. And I think if they say so, I have to take it in that way. So if based upon that basic starting point, I don't really see a big change. We just have additional capability. But that capability is for the missile going to ROK, and North Korean missiles going to ROK. So it doesn't have much impact on our capability, on our perspectives, when it comes to the defense of DPRK missile coming to Japan. I don't think they have an added capability for that. Impact of Japan-US ROK collaboration or cooperation, particularly the drill particularly for the missile defense. I don't, to be frank, I don't really know if we did the exercise solely for the missile defense, but we do have a few exercises among the three. But reality is, as you know, whether you like it or not, as I said, Japan and the United States connected, United States ROK connected, but I don't think in terms of the missile defense, Japan and ROK is connected. So I think there are two more or less separate systems, and of course US is always in the center. That's how it works. So from that viewpoint, I don't think a drill created any sort of big difference from the system I've just described. China's, well, what was the next question? Is there any dialogue between China and Japan over the missile defense? Yes or no? We do have a security dialogue, and it's free for China to raise whatever items they wish, and then I must admit they have raised occasionally, I think, about their concern on missile defense. We don't hear. We have never heard strong sort of concern expressed by the Chinese side, as strong as the one they expressed to THAAD. I don't know why, but on and off. And if that is the case, we always respond that this is designed against DPRK missiles, and unless you want to shoot us, you should be okay. And as I said, it's quite defensive anyway. So, your Chinese colleagues' point about the information sharing, as I said, sharing intelligence is one thing. Being connected close enough for the coordinating missile defense is completely different. I think the level is completely different. I don't think we have come that far. Of course, it makes sense for Japan to conclude an intelligence sharing agreement with ROK, because we are all affected if something happens in North Korea. We have that kind of intelligence exchange with the United States, and we very much like to do the same with ROK. And we're happy to do it with China as well. I think, but that is quite different from having a connected system good enough for missile defense.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Maybe Jakub on the issue of
on the question related to the Polish Patriot systems. It's a very interesting question, very valid indeed. We should always make the distinction between the policy statements by NATO and national statements. And we need to recognize there may be differences. We would also not probably push US to exclusively dedicate the Aegis ships in the Mediterranean for NATO BMD. There are multi-mission ships. So our Patriot systems, case dual use systems. So if Poland decides to offer those systems once they buy it, if they buy it, to NATO BMD architecture, it will be probably welcome, because there is never enough in all our systems. But then it would be basically ruled by the rules that NATO developed, meaning not against Russia. So it will not change the rules. If Poland believes they need it against Russia, then it's their national prerogative, but then they will be hardly in a position to dedicate those systems to NATO. So NATO BMD is certainly not against Russia, and no single contribution will change that. You also raised interesting relation, which is, or notion, which is the integrated air missile defense, and you may have seen, and you've probably as one of the few in this audience, read the communique totally, all the pages.
Maybe even one of the few in need.
Oh yeah, I don't want to speculate on that, but you see that there was quite an emphasis, of course, on defense and deterrence, including in the air. But and of course we are trying to integrate and basically put missile defense in broader context of integrated air missile defense. So while the integrated air missile defense may be part of the 360-degree deterrence and defense posture, BMD is specifically excluded from that. So BMD really remains not to be directed against Russia, and that hasn't changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jakub. So we take other questions. We go this way and we'll end. So yes, sir. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Sıtkı Egeli from Turkey, Izmir University of Economics. The questions goes to Mr. Chimoratsky, basically. It's about the NATO and the European phased adaptive approach. Yes, the capability is there with Aegis ashore as well as some of the ships in the Black Sea and Mediterranean littorals. The question concerns some of the debate we have been coming across in open sources the last couple of years regarding the rules of engagement. Because yes, it's part of the collective response, but it's built upon the capabilities of a single NATO ally state. And given the short reaction times at stake, there are automation, there are pre-authorizations and rules of engagement that needs to be defined beforehand. And we have been reading, at least, this is part of the question, that some member states have expressed concerns at Brussels that whose fingers is it going to be on the missiles and through what mechanisms at short reaction times that are at stake, how this is going to be controlled, the political oversight as well as even the military oversight by the alliance itself. So where does NATO stand? I mean, is it, I'm sure it's an issue that is being addressed, I would presume, but I haven't come across with a lot of things about the recent progress being made in this respect. And a related question actually is on the basis of Sergei Rogov's suggestion yesterday in the plenary about the Tomahawk missiles and their the fact that Mark 41 launchers in Aegis ashore are also capable of holding those missiles and firing them, and his suggestions that perhaps physically those launchers could be blocked, so therefore they cannot launch Tomahawks. Is this politically achievable or desirable? And perhaps the question also goes to Mr. Rubin, thanks or due to his expertise on the subject. Is this something physically and technically achievable? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we take another question. Yes, please. The mic is.
I'm Erwin Heckel from Germany. Having listened to the presentations on the panel, I wonder, what is the problem about missile defense? We used to think many, many years ago that there is one problem, nuclear-tipped long-range strategic missiles. And we were looking for a solution to that problem. Now it turns out more and more that there is not one problem. We have talked about today about short-range missiles, long-range missiles, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, drones, and perhaps I have forgotten one category. I wonder what is the common denominator among these problems, and I wonder, is it possible to conceive of a common solution to these different problems? And I guess not. So what are we really talking about here?
Thank you. More questions? Yes. Please. And Bruno, maybe after that? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I appreciate the...
Please, can you identify?
Yeah. First, I appreciate the...
Can you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry. I'm Mr. Idris Larafi from Morocco, okay. Professor Idris Larafi from Morocco. I appreciate the valuable presentation of the panels. My first question goes to the Japanese ambassador. The Japanese have deployed with the assistance of United States different types of anti-missile ballistic missile systems. Well, can we say that Japan has opted resolutely for mass mutual assured security rather than mutual assured destruction. Albeit we know actually that in Japan we have changed the Article 9 of the Constitution, and on the other hand, there is evolution of the public opinion towards the possession of nuclear weapons, as the extended deterrence is ineffective, as we know. My second question goes to Mr. Robin. Mr. Robin, you said that that now the main threat is the missile threat. Well, if it is the case, why the Israeli officials do not allow the monitoring team of the International Atomic Energy Agency to check the nuclear facilities as to eliminate nuclear threat and establish nuclear weapon-free zones in the Middle East? Does Tel Aviv has chosen really the missile defense option? And my last question goes to Mr. Jacob. The missile defense system now under development, is it a proper NATO or American one? And finally, a general question for all the panels. We said before, like the American expert in the 1960s, Herbert York, that for the nuclear threat, there is no technical solution. There is only political solution. But recently, the expert said there is evolution in the technological missile defense, and now it's possible to intercept the missiles threatening. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Bruno Anses.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Bruno Hanses from the European Union External Action Service. As Ambassador Ishii rightly said, this is not only about capabilities, but also diplomacy has its role to play. And one of the very few instruments that we have in this area is the Hague Code of Conduct. Let me therefore ask a question to Mr. Rubin. What is Israel's perspective on the HCOC, on the Hague Code of Conduct? Or in other words, what would it take for Israel to subscribe? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we stop there for the moment. We will have another, I think, a few minutes for additional questions. So first, maybe Jacob, the rules of engagement and the associated issues.
With your permission, I will try to respond to all the questions that were heading towards me. So rules of engagement in Turkey and over the assets of the BMD or NATO BMD architecture. Indeed, you're right. There may have been debates because, of course, political control and what exactly is protected, what is not protected, how we use the force is always sensitive. It's not something exclusive to missile defense. It's for any military capability. And as basically Murphy's law is that you will never have enough. So basically, of course, there are interesting and relevant debates, but the outcome is that there are clear command control arrangements, clear rules of engagement, which of course I cannot elaborate on too much in this environment, and so I don't see any problem with basically knowing who is deciding. After all, as I mentioned before, it's so much the BND operation is so much time constrained that all the key decisions are done in advance, so the response is pretty much automated. As regards the physical modification of MK41. It's probably more a question for the US, and we'll be more than happy. I'm looking forward with this response on the technical side of it. Politically, I wouldn't comment that from NATO's perspective. Of course, in general, if this can be done, it will be another sort of confidence-building measure. So certainly would be probably welcomed by NATO. But it is really first of all on the US to decide how far they can go with this idea. Then threat, the question on sort of integrated approach and whether there is any single solution to the threats coming from the air. I would say again, to some extent, yes, because we are indeed, as I mentioned, developing BMD in the context of integrated air missile defense, which is basically the system designed against all threats coming from or through the air, including UAVs, including cruise missiles, including ballistic missiles. So there is one solution in general sense, but indeed the particle systems and component of this architecture are much more distinct, and we may have long hours debate on how how air and missile defense can be actually integrated, because it's, of course, this perspective would really differ if you look at the strategic level or operational or tactical level. But indeed, we are approaching this issue holistically in NATO and trying to see it in the integrated fashion. And then is the NATO BMD more US rather than NATO one? Of course, it's a rather rhetorical question. I think that the person who is asking knows the answer. For us, what really matters is not who is providing the systems, but what are the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are NATO ones. They are agreed by all 28 allies. The rules of engagement, how the capability would be used, are agreed at 28. And no capability that is under control of NATO commander can be used in violation of those rules of engagement. So for me, it is clearly NATO system, whoever is providing the assets, but the rules that apply are NATO ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rabin, maybe also on the question of one size fits for all.
I noted 4 questions that were
Okay.
directed also to me, and two of them were kind of technical and 2 of them political.
Yes.
So that's like where I feel comfortable is the technical ones. I'm an engineer, not a politician. The VLS 41, the canister that launches the standard missile, is a standard canister. U.S. Navy is saving money by making one canister that fires any weapon that the ship operates. It's a very admirable technical notion, so it can fire also Tomahawk. In order to make it not to be able to fire Tomahawk, this system contains 2 elements. It's the mechanical side of it, which simply fits everything, and the electronic side of it, which prepares the firing sequence. Fire sequence for an SM-3 is completely different than the fire sequence for a cruise missile. So if you neutralize the firing mechanism or the software actually of the system, you can exclude the capability of firing. But let me add to that, there is a political dimension to it too. As much as I know, I'm seeing this Aegis Ashore from the side, the NATO program. It's an alliance program. Missiles are not deployed to Romania, will not deploy to Poland without the agreement of their governments. I don't see the Poles or the Romanians agreeing to deploy Tomahawks from their territory unless something changes this. Even if you don't put any technical block to this, first of all, it's a political question. So if you ask whether the VLS-1 can fire Tomahawk, ask first whether the owners, the landlords, will agree to put Tomahawks there. So it's first of all a political question, a technical question. The second technical question I think I was asked here about this gentleman here. Sorry, I don't get your name, about is there a common denominator to the missile problem? I mean, missiles are so various. Well, the only common denominator is technical. Missiles usually have rocket motors and fly in ballistic trajectories. But also you can say thing about aircraft. All aircraft have wings and fly by the laws of Bernoulli. But still you have civilian aircraft and military aircraft. In civilian aircraft you have passenger aircraft, you have sports aircraft, and the military aircraft you have bomber, you have fighters. And each one of them is a completely different issue with a completely different set of problems and solutions. So missiles is the same thing. You can use missile as a strategic nuclear weapon. You can use a missile as a rocket for statistical bombardment. There is no common denominator. There is common denominator in technology, but no common denominator in the use or the set of political problems that it brings. You have to look at each side separately. Now, these are the technical question. The political question, again, I'm sorry, it's out of my depth. The HCOC, I'm not a great expert. I cannot speak for Israel, but I invite you. I know that there is going to be a meeting, conference in Israel on HCOC with European partners in our Institute for National Strategic Studies, sometimes in mid-January. And if you want to be there, you'll probably be invited. Just send your credentials, and you can hear everything about it. So the last question I'd like to is about Israel joining nuclear-free zone. Again, I'm out of my depth here, but or the NPT. I think that Israel is on record that it's ready to talk about. I think conditioned on peace, general peace with its neighbors. As long as we have some neighbors in the region which are not very happy with our very existence, we have to be very careful about any disarmament motion. The basic position, I think, of our political leadership is that disarmament comes with peace. You cannot have disarmament without peace. You have peace comes with disarmament. So you cannot separate these two issues. And I think that was a point of contention in all our arguments with our neighbors, that you can separate the two issues. Beyond that, really, I'm out of my depth, and I apologize.
Thank you for that. Maybe Ambassador Ishii on the question related to the
mutually assured destruction or mutually assured security.
Yes.
We would go for the mutually assured security, and I believe we can achieve that without North Korea having nuclear weapons. That's it. And Article 9, we haven't changed Article 9, by the way. Japan becoming nuclear. Do you want us to become nuclear? Well, sometimes Mr. Trump suggested that we become nuclear, but I don't think we will, because that doesn't help us. So that's where we are. But let me just make one step backward to tell you what we'd like to do in dealing with North Korea. As I mentioned, I think diplomacy, as you mentioned, negotiation, sort of achieving nuclear-free Korean Peninsula through negotiation, this is by far the most important thing. So whatever difficulty seems, we will continue to seek for this possibility. Number two, we need to do not only dialogue, but also pressure. I think that's where the sanction comes in. And I believe the existing sanction is not focused enough and is not well abided enough. So I think we need to do a bit of homework for strengthening this part. Number three, we should be able to deter North Korea from doing anything very provocative. And we should make sure that we can cope with the situation, whatever it is. And missile defense is only one of the elements in this third pillar. And the fourth, whatever unlikely it seems, we have to be ready for the very different scenario that can include of North Korea. I'm not saying I'm not saying we are seeing the symptom of that. I'm not saying that. But now that they have nuclear weapons, nuclear materials, if and when it happens, there's a huge issue of proliferation of nuclear materials, nuclear physics, nuclear facilities. That's what we need to be more ready for, where we need a huge homework to do. So this is a combination of our policies in dealing with North Korea. So missile defense is only a part of many different pillars.
Thank you for the answers. We have time maybe for one or two additional questions. Yes, Laura, please. The mic is just coming. And thank you for identifying yourself.
Laura Greco, Union of Concerned Scientists in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So this is going to be a hard question, but I'd appreciate any insights. Dr. Rabin talked about missile defenses in the sense that they're used and that they're a system that's an important part of defense. But generally, missile defenses that are more strategic are often more symbolic and meant to dissuade countries from building ballistic missiles, and that's not been so successful. I'd agree with that. To deter them from using it, it's not clear to what level of effectiveness you'd need for such a mission, and to reassure allies, which also I would expect would require yet a different level of effectiveness. And as we know, missile defenses have long been as symbolic as technical. So if you could comment, we've talked about missile defenses in Asia and Europe, and yet a third, the attempt to thread the needle between being effective enough to reassure and defend, but yet not so effective that they tip the strategic balance with respect to our Russian and Chinese friends. So how do you attempt to thread that balance?
Okay, please.
Well, good question. Thank you for that.
Very good.
Indeed, I wouldn't call it symbolic, but certainly there are two elements. It's both to reassure and to provide a meaningful capability. I would say, in a way, the fact that it is not perfect is sort of reassurance for example, vis-a-vis Russia, because we always say, well, it is only against limited strike. It certainly does not have the capability and will not have the capability to basically really upset or to counter something as sophisticated, both in quality and in quantity, as, for example, the Russian system. And I would argue that something similar applies in the South Asian scenario as well, vis-a-vis China. We do believe, however, that it is good enough and effective enough for addressing the threat that we foresee currently, which is more shorter range in terms of the distance, and certainly less sophisticated. So there is some belief in effectiveness. Indeed, since it has not been operationally used, it's always speculation and beliefs based on testing. Even live firing is a little bit expensive, so of course you can always argue, and you know very well that even overseas in the US, there's a lot of arguments about effectiveness of their homeland defense. So of course we are monitoring that, but we do believe, and it is the bottom line, that it is good enough to address the threat as we perceive it at the moment.
Thank you, Iko. Mr. Rogov, just a very short, very last question. Yes.
Thank you. On the question of the technical changes in Mk-41 launcher, Mr. Rubin was absolutely right when he was describing what kind of changes can be done. I want to add that the tube itself could also be changed so it can permit to launch, to put there only capsules with SM-3 interceptor, and capsules with Tomahawks or other offensive missiles won't fit. And as far as the Polish and Romanian agreement to deployment of SLICMs on the territory, I'm not sure that Romanian or Polish authorities will have much access to these American facilities. Maybe I'm too skeptical. But basically, they're under 100% American control. Whatever they bring there, it's not verified or monitored by the local government authorities.
Yes,
please.
Yeah, indeed, I shouldn't speak on behalf of Polish or Romanian authorities, but I speak as a former lawyer, and basically, this scenario that you are suggesting will basically violate the agreement between the US and Romania, or Poland respectively, which was approved by their respective parliament. So if you assume that the US would do something in violation of this level of legal commitment, of course you're right that it's not verifiable, but I would still argue that there are at least legal guarantees that this is not the case, and the agreement were on hosting BMD, not any offensive capability. That's all I can say.
Thank you for these answers. The debate could go on for, I think, hours. It was fascinating. I thank you very much. I think we can thank our panelists for very nice presentations and a very nice question and answer session. So please, we'll give them a round of applause.